Meanwhile, Pepe Escobar has a very detailed article called The Shadow War in Syria. It's a bit complex and technical. I recommend you read the article for yourself, but basically, you've got the NATO forces backing this covert civil war in Syria. You've read past headlines about where they're shipping in Libyan rebels to now be Syrian rebels to oust Assad. Furthermore, Turkey's in on it, and this quote here, "The pressure is relentless. Diplomats at Brussels have confirmed to Asia Times Online that the NATO and GCC operatives have set up a command center in Iskenderun and Hatay province in Turkey. Crucial, Aleppo in northwest Syria is very close to the Turkish-Syrian border, and the cover story for this new command center is to engineer humanitarian corridors to Syria." So again, they're carrying out semi-covert war, as they did in Libya. Pepe calls it a 2.0 version in Syria, again, under the humanitarian crisis excuse. And so now with more on the situation in Syria and really all of the Middle East and Central Asia and geopolitics around the globe is Pepe Escobar. He's a longtime Asia Times correspondent and a true geopolitical expert. Pepe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great pleasure.
So I know we have this Syria article here, but you've been even more focused on the situation in Pakistan. Obviously, tensions have been heating up there with the recent strike that NATO's basically calling accidental. Why don't you highlight the most important things for us?
Well, the most important thing is that NATO and the US, they are burning all the bridges that they have, even with the Pakistani military. They already burnt the bridges with the bulk of the Pakistani population, in fact. This incident less than a week ago was horrible because it was a basic NATO mistake. They have the coordinates of all these checkpoints and police advanced posts in the border, in all the agencies, the 7 agencies in the Pakistani side that border Afghanistan. And if you look at what they are saying in Peshawar, for instance, which they have a very lively Pakistani press in Peshawar, they say that there was no warning. There was an helicopter that came first. They threw flares. Then the gunships came, and they started deliberately killing people one by one, 24 Pakistani soldiers. So how do you explain something like this? It's not a failure of communication. The Pakistani army says, look, we got no warning whatsoever. They knew that this was a Pakistani post. There were no insurgents, let's put it this way, in the area. So what is NATO going to do? Look, the Pakistani response is very, very serious. Monday in Bonn, in Germany, like exactly 10 years after that famous Bonn conference, I'm sure a lot of people will remember, after the so-called end of the Afghan war in 2001, they're going to have a 10th anniversary commemoration meeting of Americans, Europeans, Turks, and guess who's not going to be at the table? The Pakistanis. So you cannot expect the West to come up with a solution for Afghanistan without Pakistan, and even worse, without Iran, because Western Afghanistan, most of what happens is in close contact with Iran. They are Tajiks. It's 4 hours by taxi, let's put it this way, from the Iranian-Afghan border to Mashhad, the big Iranian city to the east. So they're not going to be on the table. What does the US and NATO expect to accomplish in a conference like this? Doesn't make sense.
Well, can you draw out some of the important geopolitical significance with Pakistan? China, of course, saying any attack on Pakistan would be equivalent to attacking China. Obviously, the distribution networks are tied to all the powers in Central Asia. Help us see what's going on here.
Okay. First point is the distribution network that feeds the US and NATO troops in Afghanistan. Pakistan, these last few days, they cut off that, it's a snake full of lorries, let's put it this way, that goes from Karachi in southern Pakistan to Quetta, and then across the border to southern Afghanistan, to Kandahar especially, and then another snake that goes north to the Khyber Pass and then crosses on the way to Jalalabad and Kabul. So if you see the photographs, they are amazing because you have like hundreds of kilometers of lorries that they are stuck there because they cannot go anywhere, at least for the moment. This is Pakistani retaliation. And there's another distribution network, which is called NDN, the Northern Distribution Network, that goes all across Central Asia. It's very complicated, crosses Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and then gets into northern Afghanistan. But US and NATO are supplied, but less than 20% goes through this route. So if you start antagonizing the Russians, for instance, which gave permission for this route to exist, soon we may come to a situation within the next few weeks or maybe months where all the troops, American and NATO, in Afghanistan, they cannot be supplied anymore because Pakistan is being antagonized and Russia, by a myriad ways, let's put it this way, is also being antagonized. The missile defense controversy, the fact that an invasion, a probable invasion, or even destabilization of Syria, the Russians already said at the UN Security Council, forget about it, we're not going to vote for a resolution. And if you come here, watch out, because we have a naval base in Syria. The Russians have a naval base in the port of Tartus, in the eastern Mediterranean in Syria. And obviously, if anything happens via NATO, with Turkey and with France, and even without the US in the background, as it is at the moment, the first thing they're going to do is buy a Russian base in Syria. So the Russians are following this very closely, and they are getting closer and closer with Pakistan, which is something that until, let's say, a year ago, was not even on the cards. And the crux of this rapprochement, let's say, this getting together, is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. That's a mechanism that it's also 10 years old. Russia, China, and 3 of the Central Asian stands. And we have 4 observers at the SCO, including Iran and Pakistan. And the Russians already said, and they said that for the first time only a few weeks ago, they want Pakistan as a full member. And the Chinese are saying, we also want Iran as a full member. What does that mean in practice? It means that soon in Asia, we're going to have a mechanism that, of course, it's not like NATO because it's not primarily a military alliance, but it's a security mechanism, an economic cooperation mechanism, and soon they're going to develop a military integration as well. So on one side, we're going to have Russia, China, the Central Asians, Pakistan and Iran, for instance, and on the other side, we're going to have NATO. Who can come up with the best solution for Afghanistan? The Afghans themselves are saying, they are observers of the SCO, by the way. The Afghans themselves are saying, look, we need a regional solution with all the internal players on the table in Afghanistan, but with all our neighbors on the table especially. And when you look at it, there's definitely no place for NATO or for Washington in this arrangement.
Yeah. And so obviously the larger question, though, is the World War III scenario. Is it going to happen? Because Syria is on the hit list, Iran's on the hit list, and things are heating up there at the same time this stuff is happening with Pakistan. I mean, what do you really see in the cards here?
Look, I'm not apocalyptic, you know. I may be very pessimistic sometimes when you look at reality, of course. But realistically, what's going on is the Pentagon still wants to implement its doctrine, that it's called full spectrum dominance, that it's an official Pentagon doctrine since 2002. So land, air, sea domination, cyberspace domination, and even outer space domination, of course. And Middle East is just a way to get to the big prize, which is Asia. And in fact, a few commentators, like including Michael Clare, for instance, I read his piece, I think 1 or 2 days ago, already talking about what does it mean, Obama's Pacific Century or Hillary Clinton's Pacific Century. What does that mean? It means that the US or the Obama administration, because of pressure by the Pentagon generals, they are already launching a new Cold War against China, especially. But don't forget, a war against China can be a war against Russia as well, because the Russian interests are in Central Asia, are in the Caucasus, are in the Mediterranean as well. China's interests are in Africa, some of them in the Middle East, because they import a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia and gas from Iran, and across Asia. So the Pentagon wants to pick a fight simultaneously with Russia and China. I'm not sure this is a very intelligent proposition, to say the least.
Well, if you could also get into some of the most basic facts about your Syrian article, because to me it looks like an all-out covert war. There's a lot of allies and covert things going on. They've just shipped over a lot of the Libyan rebels now in Syria as rebels.
Yes, I think that the most important element, at least for the past few weeks, it's something as few sources confirmed in France, some other sources in Turkey. We confirmed with Brussels. And diplomats in Brussels told us explicitly, yes, there is a control and command center already established in southern Turkey near the Turkish-Syrian border. It's in a place called Iskenderun, it's a very small town, but it's very close to a big city, very important, Antakya, which is the Antioch of biblical times, right? And across the border, like, if you go from the border to Aleppo, for instance, it's half an hour, 40 minutes. Is Aleppo, which is the big city in northern Syria. And it's the largest Syrian city as well. Over 2.5 million people live there. This region, most people are Sunnis, but there are a lot of Kurds living there as well. So what is the strategy? Considering that Russia and China vetoed a UN security resolution authorizing a Libya-style operation against Syria. Considering that the US does not to be at the forefront of this expedition, let's put it this way. In fact, the whole thing is subcontracted to basically France and Turkey. So what we have in this place is Iskenderun. It's very, very important from now on. We have French intelligence people. We have the British MI6. We have Saudis, Qataris, and people from the Emirates as well. We have engineers and naval officers, very qualified people. So they are trying to organize near the border a sort of northern insurrection in Libya. Oh, I'm sorry, in Syria. I say Libya because Libya is on my mind, because it's basically the same thing, now remixed, right?
Absolutely.
So now the scenario is, okay, we try to launch an insurrection north in Syria, in the big cities, in the small cities, I'm sorry, of course, like Homs, but especially trying to get the big prize, which is Aleppo. If Aleppo would fall to the insurgents, let's put it this way, which is a mix of defectors from the Syrian army and these foreign mercenaries. For the moment, there are not many people. I'm in contact with a guy in Homs. He's a very good informant, for what's going on the ground. And he's telling me, look, we haven't seen these people here. And the support for the Free Syrian Army in this area, at least, is mixed. A lot of people view them as criminals, pure and simple. There are a lot of gangs in the area. People report they are being harassed, cars stolen, that kind of stuff. Petty crime, basically. And not many people are talking about serious, let's say, guerrilla bands attacking the Syrian army. And another point that it's important, there has not been a mass defection from the Syrian intelligence system, the military, or the police, at least so far. This tells us that the support for the regime is still very solid among the people that are ruling Syria, and including the trading classes, the bazaris, let's put it this way. They are very important in Damascus and in Aleppo, both big cities, and they're still more or less siding with the regime, including the Sunnis, because they don't know what could happen next. If there is a civil war, who's going to rule the country afterward? Nobody trusts this Syrian National Council that was established in Paris and in Turkey a little bit. In fact, there is an interview at the Wall Street Journal today of the president of this council, and it's ridiculous. You know, he's like he was briefed at Washington or at Tel Aviv. He's emitting all the right signals, but you cannot trust these people. And the Syrians themselves, they're saying, we don't trust these people. Most of them are exiles. You know, they're not people who lived here and understand the regime and understand what we need in terms of more political participation and all that. They're a bunch of opportunists, just like the opportunists in Libya. You know, hasn't changed much. So we have to look over the past few weeks, at least. We have to be careful looking at, is there going to be a destabilization of northern Syria? If that happens, maybe we are on our way to destabilization of the whole country, but basically fueled by foreign troops, by mercenaries, and the power that is coordinating all this is Turkey. Which brings us to, let me just finish with this because nobody knows the answer to this question. What do the Turks imagine they will accomplish by destabilizing one of their neighbors, considering that their official foreign policy basically, it's called zero problems with our neighbors.
Right.
So still nobody knows what is the Turk game. You know, I've been trying to get it from people that I know in Turkey. They don't know. People in Brussels say, look, I think maybe there is some kind of deal, but we don't know the terms of this, a backroom deal that would obviously involve the U.S. But we don't have elements, and it's pure speculation, of course. What we do know is the very convergence of interest between the Turks and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, right, means Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all the other Persian Gulf monarchies. They want to get rid of the Assad regime because it's an Arab secular republic. They want something closer to the Muslim Brotherhood in power. And this is true. If the Assad regime falls, guess who's going to inherit Syria? The Muslim Brotherhood, just like they are inheriting Egypt. We saw these first initial results at the Egyptian election. Who's ahead? The Muslim Brotherhood over 40%, and an Islamist Salafi party with almost 25%. And these people in Syria, they are also popular, especially in the poorer areas in the countryside and in some of these places where the protests started, including the small towns in the border, the Jordanian-Syrian border, and in homes as well. So look, the scenario ahead, if there is really a destabilization of the regime, is horrendous. Nothing good will come out of it. You know, I don't see anything good coming out of it. Certainly not democracy.
Yes, sir. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we should keep an eye on, or are these pretty much the main proxies at the moment?
Yes, I suggest everybody keep an eye on this Syrian National Council, what they're saying. If they're going to visit, Washington, especially, they're more or less based in Paris and Turkey. Mm-hmm. Keep an eye on what the Turks are saying out loud, because they, few days ago, 3 days ago, they slapped sanctions on Syria, and the sanctions are exactly the same package as the Arab League sanctions. And also, let's keep an eye on. I would say there's a sort of window of opportunity for something drastic to happen in the next few weeks before, the campaign in the U.S., the presidential campaign in the U.S. starts in Iowa and then in New Hampshire. So things could happen between Christmas and New Year that we don't know about, of course.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep watching, and we appreciate you joining us, of course.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks very much.
And that's it tonight for the InfoWars Nightly News. Of course, a lot of news to keep an eye on and continue observing. We'll be back next week. Stay tuned.